So, questions, comments? Yes?
Thank you. So you briefly mentioned when it comes down to model based on unidimensional assumption of selfish individuals, we need some sort of generalization, yet they've gone too far. So I'm just wondering how you recommend, from your perspective, we could make some amendments to this mainstream model that we're using and making use of in many situations. And when it comes down to application of the model, perhaps do you suggest that we apply the model to lower extent than we are doing at this point?
Yes, how I see it is, I'm not against, the people using models assuming very simplified unidimensional individual with much greater power of rationality than what real human beings have. But when you make that kind of model, you have to be clear that these are based on unrealistic assumptions, and it will apply only to this, if you like, experimental condition that you have set up. Yeah? So in trying to apply those models, you have to be extremely careful. I mean, having built, say, efficient market hypothesis, you should be then saying that, however, the applicability of this is very limited and is only given as a kind of heuristic device, so that we have that kind of easier understanding of some part of the mechanisms that work in the real world. That would be fine with me. The problem begins when they believe that this is how the world works, and then recommend policies based on that. Financial deregulation, creation of the highly complex financial products that we just don't have the ability to deal with. Andy Haldane, the chief economist of the Bank of England, once made this back of the envelope calculation showing that in order to fully absorb the information related to what is known as CDO squared, collateral debt obligations squared. I mean, I don't have time to explain this that thing, but it's basically one of these the new kind of financial products that is not necessarily the most complex, but one of the more complex ones. And Andy Haldane figured out that in order to absorb full information behind a typical CDO squared product, you should read 1 billion pages. Because this product is made up of thousands of individual mortgage contracts pulled into what is known as asset-backed security or mortgage-backed security, ABS or MBS, hundreds of which are pulled into form CDO, and CDO squared is combination of those two. And each of these contracts will involve information, contracts, So he figured out that basically you need to be able to absorb information contained in 1 billion pages. No one has the ability or time to read it. And then we create this product, and we think we can predict how it's going to behave by some simulation model, and we know that it doesn't work. So the first point is that you need to recognize the limitation of your model. And then the second point is to accept that there could be multiplicity of models with different assumptions, each highlighting different aspects. So some models that could very much emphasize irrationality or the altruism or whatever, and then you should treat them as seriously as you treat the standard selfish rational individual model, rather than treating them as they do at the moment as some kind of secondary aberration. So once again, this is my pluralist position. I'm not saying that we have to replace this with something else. All I'm asking is that you need to know the limitations of your particular theory and model, and then also be willing to accept that there should be multiplicity of different models and theories.
We hear a lot in the media nowadays about mental health crisis in this country, maybe more broadly as well. Do you think these ideas common in economics that individuals, selfish behavior is the standard, if not the only way to behave? Altruism is very rare, if existing at all. Do you think these ideas permeate at all into society and have an effect on the way individuals feel they should behave or feel that others do behave, and affects the mental health of individuals and societies? And beyond that, do you think it affects perhaps the mental health of people who study, teach, or work in economics?
Economic theories have actually very seriously influenced the way societies are organized. I mean, I already, in my lecture on the nature of economics, discussed how this has changed the way, for example, the welfare state works and how government services are provided. Yeah, and when you when you change the environment with certain assumptions, then yeah, I mean, the people would naturally, indirectly absorb those assumptions. So they'll begin to, say, well, okay, I mean, there are now all these the kind of quantified performance the targets, and basically these were set, assuming that I'm going to cheat, at every opportunity. Okay, if that's what you want, that's what you will get. I'm not going to, do extra time just to make the plays run well. I mean, I'll just do things that will tick the boxes in this form, and that's how I'm going to behave. So yes, I mean, the economic theories have influenced the way our societies organize, and that has influenced how people see the world, how they behave, how they see themselves. And yeah, in general, the changes in the last few decades have created a very competitive environment, the very unforgiving environment in which you are basically supposed to be in a war against everyone else. You are actually supposed to do nasty things, selfish things in order to get ahead. But then there's always that moral justification that this is actually good for society, as Adam Smith said about butcher, baker, and brewer. So yes, I mean, the economic theories are not kind of innocent the things that exist from outside the real world. I mean, it has very much affected how people see the world, how they see themselves, how they behave. And yes, I mean, I think the increase in the mental health problems is related to this environment of job insecurity, financial insecurity, the competitive pressure. I'm not enough of a psychologist to tell you how this exactly happens, but I'll be very surprised if someone produce a research saying that these changes in social environment and economic arrangement have nothing to do with the increase in health, mental health problems.
In the best of my knowledge, some of the issues that you mentioned has been incorporated in the individualistic neoclassical approach. For example, you say the complicated individual has been already treated as an issue for some neoclassical economists. And I know, for example, some research that trying to incorporate altruism in utility function, for example. And also with, for example, in the divided individual, the work of John Elster try to focus on multiple personalities and so on. Also, I know with the bumbling individual, there is a lot of research trying to use bounded rationality and not total rationality in neoclassical studies. But I haven't seen micro-individual neoclassical research trying to treat the embedded and impressionable individual. Yeah. So in your opinion, is this possible to do it? Is possible to incorporate in an individualistic approach the impressionable individual on the embedded individual? Or if not possible, what are the ways to do the research and trying to incorporate this thing?
No, of course, yeah, some of these points have been at least the attempts have been made to incorporate them into the kind of standard framework. But some of those things are actually not, what's the word? Some of those things are actually not consistent, if you may say, because, for example, you try to build in the altruism into utility function, then actually you destroy the very notion of altruism. Altruism exists only because you don't care about utility. Yeah, so let me give you an example. I mean, I forget exactly what the occasion was, but once I was trying to tell my daughter that I'll do something for her. I mean, out of parental love, and then she was a petulant teenager then, and she blurted out, "Oh, Daddy, you are trying to do that only to feel better about yourself." Okay, yeah, maybe you can reinterpret what I was doing in that way, but that completely destroys the notion of parental love. Yeah, and many of these models have said things like, "Oh, she doesn't lie because then she'll feel guilty about it." Yeah, but then where does the guilt come from? So you need to look at socialization, the embedded individual. So some of these attempts really undermine the very notion of the ideas like altruism and non-selfish the motivations. Yeah, and also in terms of models trying to incorporate bounded rationality, I think, Herbert Simon actually was very unhappy with the way this notion of bounded rationality was abused, because people often reinterpreted it as saying, well, we have resource cause and we have decision-making cause, and given that we have the bounded rationality, we also need to consider how costly the decision-making is. So if the problem is complex, maybe it's actually rational to be ignorant, choose to be ignorant, because once you try to make fully rational decision, it is impossible. That's not completely inconsistent with what Simon was trying to say, but his point was basically that because we have bounded rationality, we try to get around the problem by building organizations and institutions. We don't try to deal with it at the individual level in that kind of higher level maximization exercise. So once again, yes, some insights have been incorporated, but is it really the real thing? So I think that there is a fundamental problem with incorporating these other things into that standard neoclassical individualist vision. Yeah, and things like embeddedness and impressionable individuals, they are far more difficult to incorporate into neoclassical optimization model. So that's why it hasn't been done. But these are in some ways as important, if not more, than the other things. And also they are related, as I said, where does altruism come from? A lot of it comes from the socialization process. From when you are young, your parents tell you that, you have to have regard for other people, you can't be completely selfish, So actually we are socialized in that way, and then we are made to learn this worldview in which everyone's basically out to get everyone else. And that apparently has made economists more selfish than other people. People have done some research trying to see how studying economics changes people, and indeed, there is evidence showing that people who have studied neoclassical economics has become more selfish. So what you study does actually influence how you think, which actually proves this point that preferences are a matter of dispute. Because basically, you teach people a particular thing, which make them behave in a particular way, so you cannot treat the individuals as sovereign. So actually, the economic students themselves are providing evidence that neoclassical economic theory is wrong. Yeah? Well, not wrong, but limited. Yeah? So we need to basically have a kind of a pluralist attitude towards these things, because sometimes it may be possible to incorporate some insights from other schools and the criticisms into the neoclassical model, but you have to accept that this is never going to be complete. Yeah? And then there are some things that you really cannot reconcile with the neoclassical model. And then you have to accept that, yes, our models are good for these things. Your models might be better for other things. And let's try to see how they work in the real world. Yeah? I think that's the only solution, because I don't believe that any theory, I mean, not even the theory of Herbert Simon, who's my intellectual hero, can explain everything.
I was just wondering whether, particularly in the bumbling individual element that you spoke about, whether there's a sort of phenomenon of, especially in speculative financial markets, where the movement of the market will be based on sort of the expectation of what others will do. Talk about herd instinct. Is there an element where this becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy? And so what is effectively an irrational decision actually becomes rational because everybody else is making the same decision.
Yes, no, I mean, that's true. I mean, many researchers have shown that in the financial market, often it is rational to be irrational. You know? I mean, move with the herd, because that's how you come on top. So yeah, I mean, you can choose to be swayed by emotion in a rational way, but first of all, the boundary between these two is rather tricky. Huh? Because if you really don't believe in emotion, are you really being driven by it? But more importantly, we know that the result of these things that run its course is very often the financial disasters. So yeah, you don't have to say that everyone in the financial market was irrational. But even if there was some elements of irrationality that created this bubble, and then it becomes rational to be part of that bubble, only that at some point it will burst, and a lot of people who thought they could get out in time will be left standing, huge unserviceable debts and other financial products, and then the consequences not just for them, but given the importance of the financial sector in modern economy, is for the whole world. I mean, the estimate by the International Labour Organization said within 1 year, 2 years of the 2008 financial crisis, it created 80 million unemployed people worldwide. So the consequences are huge. And you can't just say that, well, I mean, these people behaved in the way they behaved because it was rational for them, because it has serious social consequences. So you need to put in regulations to prevent these irrational elements in the financial market to take over and potentially ruin the whole world eventually.